Tonight we enter the Hebrew month of Nisan, which brings with it the first harbingers of spring and the promise of Passover. The beginning of any month carries with it the anticipation of a fresh start, but entering into this month is extra special because in the Torah, this month, Nisan, was designated as the first month of the Jewish calendar. Just before giving instructions for the Passover sacrifice, 2 weeks before the eventual liberation of the Israelites from Egypt, God tells Moses and Aaron, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first of months of the year for you." Eventually, Jewish tradition will give us 4 different new years. Rosh Hashanah marks the anniversary of the creation of the world. Tu B'Shvat is the new year for counting the age of trees, and the first of Elul is the new year for counting animal tithes. I'm sure that one will come in handy. But tonight marks the birthday of the Jewish people as they prepared to move forward to their own redemption. By placing this month first, the Torah ensures that our story will always begin with the anticipation of our liberation. If the 15th of Shvat is the new year for the trees, then tonight, the first of Nisan, is the new year for hope. And boy, do we need it. Because tonight's celebration of a new year in the history of our people coincides with another anniversary. 1 year ago, New York shuttered itself, closing businesses and schools and warning residents to leave their homes only if absolutely necessary. What was supposed to be a few weeks of hunkering down has turned into a year of previously unimaginable loss, hardship, and disruption. In this week's Torah portion, Moses calls all the community who are Chacham Lev, wise of heart, and Nadiv Lev, generous of heart, to contribute their skills to the building of the Mishkan, that portable sanctuary that Rabbi Ross referred to that allowed God's presence to dwell among them as they wandered through the wilderness. When all of that work is done and the Mishkan is finally assembled, we're told that Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it and the presence of Adonai filled the Mishkan. When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out and go on their various journeys. But if the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. We have so many in this community who are both wise and generous of heart, who have helped us to build a sacred environment in which we can feel God's presence among us, even as we have been unable to gather in person. We have staff who have honed new skills to help us gather using electronics. We have congregants who've reached out to support their fellow members. We have volunteers who have continued to feed our neighbors through our breakfast program, and core group leaders who have helped build new connections. And we have clergy who are sharing their passions for pickles or Sondheim over coffee every week. We've seen our members embrace meditation and Havdalah and to grow our daily minyan. It's been remarkable to witness God's presence reflected in the care and compassion of this community. And yet, for months we've been held outside our sanctuary, feeling a bit frozen in time, like the Israelites wondering when the cloud would lift, signaling that it's time to move forward. The cloud has not yet lifted. We need to hang on a little longer. But unlike last year at this time, we can see a little more light and a little more hope on the horizon. Speaking of the new CDC guidelines allowing vaccinated people to gather in small groups with loved ones, Dr. Rebecca Weintraub told the New York Times, "It's been well studied that anticipation is a significant component of joy. These guidelines help each person coming in for a vaccine anticipate future joy. As a physician and a vaccinator, I'm thrilled. I don't know if there's any better description of the feeling of these early days of spring than the anticipation of future joy. The writer and teacher Parker Palmer writes, "Before spring becomes beautiful, it is plug ugly, nothing but mud and muck. I have walked in the early spring through fields that will suck your boots off, a world so wet and woeful it makes you yearn for the return of ice. But in that muddy mess, the conditions for rebirth are being created." He says, "Though spring begins slowly and tentatively, it grows with a tenacity that never fails to touch me. The smallest and most tender shoots insist on having their way, coming through ground that looked only a few weeks earlier as if it would never grow anything again. The crocuses and snowdrops do not bloom for long, but their mere appearance, however brief, is always a harbinger of hope. And from these small beginnings, hope grows at a geometric rate." Right now, we may be exhausted from a year of wading through muck. But on this anniversary of our world growing smaller, Nisan, the month of Passover and of liberation, comes to remind us that even in the darkest times, greater freedom and redemption lie ahead. We see this not only in the green shoots that are starting to emerge from the ground, but also in the plans we're starting to make. This week, I met with some Central members, many of whom had not traveled in a year, who shared their dreams and plans for places they hope to go as vaccines become more available and the pandemic begins to recede. Most of these plans are 6 months or even a year away, but the very idea of planning itself contains a kind of hope that is felt out of reach for so long. Our tradition understands that after a long winter, we may need some encouragement to lift our eyes and take notice of possibility. There's a special blessing that we say only during the month of Nisan, when we see the first blossoming fruit trees of the year. Upon seeing these first promising buds, we're told to say, "Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, in whose world nothing is lacking, and who made wondrous creations and beautiful trees for human beings to enjoy." This time-limited blessing wakes us up and teaches us to be on the lookout for the tiny buds that will someday bear fruit, signs that more abundant days are ahead. So as we go about our lives in this new month, let's keep this blessing in our pockets. May it give us the encouragement we need in these muddy early days of spring as we take our first tentative steps into a new year to keep our eyes peeled for signs of hope. Happy New Year.